Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something really fundamental to our daily lives, our neighborhoods.
Hmm.
You know, that place you call home, the streets you walk, the opportunities you see. They aren't just random.
Not at all.
They are actually shaped by these really deep historical policies. Forces maybe you don't even realize are still, in play.
Right. The patterns we see today, development, opportunity, access,
Yeah?
none of it's accidental.
Exactly. It's the result of decisions made, well, decades ago.
And that's our focus for this deep dive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The enduring legacy of racist housing policies here in the U.S.,
Yeah, specifically redlining.
specifically redlining, implemented by the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA,
Yeah,
starting way back in the mid-30s, running officially until, what, 68?
right.
But this wasn't just some, bureaucratic oversight. It was a deliberate, systemic denial of home ownership, of investment
Mm-hmm.
to Black individuals, Black communities.
And the effects are still being felt.
Oh, absolutely. It created these huge economic and social gaps, these disparities that honestly are still shaping our cities and towns today.
Mm.
It's baked into the system.
So to really get into this, we're diving into some powerful sources. We've got a great article from The Atlantic, The Racist Housing Policy That Made Your Neighborhood.
A really insightful piece.
And it leans heavily on Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, especially his thinking around compounding moral debts.
That's a key concept here.
Yeah, so our mission is basically to unpack all this, peel back the layers, understand how deep this goes, and how it touches, well, probably your own neighborhood.
And you should really prepare for some aha moments, because we're going to connect these dots, these historical policies. They connect directly to the street you live on.
Seriously.
Yeah, the schools, the local economy. Understanding this isn't just like a history lesson.
Mm-hmm.
It's critical for grasping why things are the way they are now.
And thinking about the future, too, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's about seeing that blueprint of inequality that's kind of etched into the landscape all around us. It affects everything: property values, health, investment flows, or, the lack of investment.
Okay, so let's unpack it. Where do we start? 1934, the FHA.
Yeah, 1934, the creation of the Federal Housing Administration.
Now, on the surface, you hear about the FHA, and it's often, celebrated. It made homeownership accessible, right, for millions?
It really did transform the market. Before the FHA, you needed huge down payments, short loan terms, like 5, 10 years maybe.
Out of reach for most people.
Totally.
Yeah.
But the FHA started insuring mortgages. That lowered the risk for banks.
So they could offer smaller down payments, longer terms, like 30 years.
Exactly. And that opened the door for loads of people. It really helped build the white middle class, you could argue.
But here's the twist, the paradox. This system, designed to help some people achieve that American dream, was actively, deliberately harming others at the same time.
It's a really unsettling duality, isn't it?
Right.
An institution expanding wealth for one group while, systematically shutting another group out right from the start.
A foundational contradiction, like you said.
Absolutely. And it laid the tracks for decades of inequality. So the core mechanism, how did it work? It was the FHA's explicit, written down refusal to back loans for Black people.
Explicit, not just implied.
Explicit. But it went further. They also refused to back loans for anyone living near Black people, regardless of their own race.
Wow. So even if you were white, but lived in an integrated area or near a Black neighborhood.
You could be out of luck for an FHA-backed loan. Think about the ripple effect. If the federal government says an area is too risky simply because Black people live there or nearby.
Then private banks aren't going to lend there either, right? Not without that federal guarantee.
Exactly. It's too risky for them. Ta-Nehisi Coates puts it so well. He says, redlining destroyed the possibility of investment wherever Black people live.
Destroyed the possibility.
Yeah. It wasn't just about stopping individual home loans. It was about starving entire communities of capital. Money for upkeep, for improvements, for businesses, for growth.
So even if you owned a home, its value wouldn't grow like in white neighborhoods.
Right, because there's no investment coming in. Properties couldn't appreciate. It trapped people in areas with falling assets, limited opportunities. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy engineered by the government.
And they made this official with that grading system, the maps.
Oh, yeah, the infamous maps. Literally coloring neighborhoods.
Yeah.
A, B, C, D.
Green and blue, yellow, red.
Green was best, desirable, easy loans. Blue, still desirable. Yellow was declining.
And red.
Red was hazardous.
Yeah.
And the chilling part. These grades were explicitly tied to race.
So black neighborhoods or even diverse ones.
Almost always got graded D. Red. It basically wrote racial segregation and economic exclusion right into the government's loan rules.
Let's zoom in on that C grade, the yellow areas, because the language they used is so revealing.
It really is. The source mentions seemingly neutral things first, like age, obsolescence, and change of style.
Okay, sounds like just describing older houses, maybe?
But the FHA's own underwriting manuals, the instructions for appraisers, they went way deeper. They looked at social characteristics,
Meaning?
meaning the people living there. The manual specifically warned against inharmonious racial groups. They basically said if black people live here or might move here, property values go down.
That's blatant.
It is. And that yellow classification, it mentioned expiring restrictions or lack of them.
Okay, restrictions. What does that mean here? It sounds technical.
It is technical, but it's crucial. Restrictions meant restrictive covenants. These were legal clauses written right into property deeds,
Saying what?
saying the property could not be sold to non-whites, to black people, often other groups too.
So the FHA saw the lack of those racist clauses or them expiring as a negative thing.
Exactly. It meant the neighborhood was higher risk, yellow, because its racial purity, its homogeneity, wasn't guaranteed anymore.
Wow. So they were actively rewarding segregation.
And penalizing integration, or even the possibility of it. The logic is just chilling when you unpack it.
And the description gets worse, right? Infiltration of a lower grade population.
Yeah, I mean, there's no subtlety there. That's code, barely even code, for black families moving in.
So the FHA's logic was just black people being present devalues the whole neighborhood.
That was the core assumption. Makes it less attractive for investment. A self-fulfilling prophecy, like we said, driven by racist policy.
Okay, what else characterized these yellow areas?
Well, it lists other things. Inadequate transportation, insufficient utilities, perhaps heavy tax burdens, poor maintenance of homes, etc.
But hang on, isn't that kind of a chicken and egg thing?
Absolutely. Many of those problems were often the result of disinvestment that had already happened because of these attitudes, not the cause.
Right. Lack of investment leads to poor maintenance, maybe insufficient utilities.
Exactly. They also mentioned jerry-built areas, cheap, quick construction, and neighborhoods lacking homogeneity.
And lacking homogeneity, we know, is code for
Racial diversity, which, in their framework, was a risk factor. Bad for property values.
So you've got this mix of real infrastructure issues, maybe worsened by neglect, blended with just straight-up racial bias.
And the outcome for these yellow areas was concrete. The source says, good mortgage lenders are more conservative and hold loan commitments under the lending ratio for the green and blue areas.
Meaning less money available, higher interest rates.
Yeah.
Tougher terms, if you could even get a loan.
Right. It just locks in that cycle of disinvestment, makes it impossible for those areas to catch up. And for the D, the red areas, forget it. Loans were basically impossible.
So think about what that meant for a black family back then.
Yeah, imagine you have a good job, good income, savings, everything that should qualify you.
The things that worked for a white family buying a house in a green area.
Exactly. But because you're black or because you live in a red or even yellow neighborhood, the FHA won't back the loan.
Which means the bank won't give you a mortgage.
Right. They just wouldn't take that perceived risk without the government's guarantee. So that main path to building wealth in America, owning a home, was just cut off.
Blocked. Based purely on race.
Denied the chance to build equity, use that equity for education, for starting a business, passing wealth down, locked out of the whole post-war economic boom that homeownership fueled for so many white families.
It wasn't passive, it was active. Government policy.
Active government-sanctioned economic strangulation.
What?
Building barriers that hard work alone couldn't overcome.
And a crucial point here is that this wasn't just the FHA acting alone, right? It spread.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the impact just explodes.
Yeah.
The entire mortgage industry as a whole started adopting these same practices. They used the FHA's logic, their maps, their risk assessments.
So even if a loan wasn't going through the FHA, private lenders were still using the same biased playbook?
Pretty much. The federal government set the standard. They said, these areas are risky because of who lives there. And the rest of the industry, banks, appraisers, real estate agents, they just fell in line.
It normalized the bias.
Completely. It embedded the idea that black neighborhoods were financially unsound, regardless of anything else. A ripple effect that became this huge wave of discrimination across the whole country.
And the consequences for black communities were just horrific.
Truly horrific.
Yeah.
Over generations, it kicks off this vicious cycle of disinvestment and devaluation.
That was so.
Well, loans dry up, investment stops, so property values don't rise, maybe they even fall.
Okay.
Infrastructure crumbles because there's no money for repairs. Schools get underfunded because property taxes are low.
Because the property values are depressed.
Right. Public services decline.
Hmm.
Local businesses can't get loans to start or grow. Fewer jobs, less economic activity.
It just spirals downward.
Exactly. And even if someone managed to buy a home, maybe through really exploitative means like contract selling.
Where you don't even build equity until the very last payment.
Right. Those predatory deals. Even then, your house is in a market where values are stagnant or falling. You can't build wealth. It's an environment engineered for failure.
Undermining the whole community.
Systematically.
So what you get is this stark divide, a completely split housing market.
Yeah, profoundly bifurcated. On one side, white Americans getting FHA backing, easy access to cheap long-term mortgages.
Buying homes, building equity, passing it down, the classic American dream path.
The engine of middle-class wealth building for them. But on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
Black Americans systematically shut out, denied that primary tool for economic progress.
And that's the core of Coates' compounding moral debts idea, isn't it?
That's the heart of it. It's not just individual bad acts, it's federal policy engineering, a massive racial wealth gap, a structural advantage for white families passed down for generations.
And a structural disadvantage for Black families that just keeps echoing.
Think about it. One family buys a home, builds equity, sends kid to college, leaves an asset. Another family, just as capable, is denied that first step. They fall behind, and the gap compounds over time. Economically, socially, in terms of opportunity, that debt just grows.
It's a systemic advantage and disadvantage built right into the country's foundation.
And it affects everything. It's not just abstract theory. We see concrete evidence. The impact didn't just stop in 1968 when redlining officially ended.
No, it just changed shape, right? Solidified into other forms of inequality.
Exactly. Which brings us to the case studies and the research.
Right. The source highlights Ta-Nehisi Coates looking closely at North Lawndale in Chicago.
And it's presented as this extreme portrait of the trends that ail Black Chicago. A microcosm, almost.
A lens to see the broader national picture through.
And when you look at the specific numbers for Chicago that the source pulls out, they are just staggering.
Okay, like what?
Let's start with income. The average per capita income in Chicago's white neighborhoods is almost 3 times higher than in its Black neighborhoods.
3 times? That's enormous.
It's a chasm. Think what that means for daily life. Groceries, schools, healthcare, public services. Just fundamentally different levels of resource and opportunity from day one.
It's not just about what one person earns, it's the whole community's economic health.
Or lack thereof. And it goes beyond income. The source brings in Robert Sampson's work, the Harvard sociologist, his book, Great American City.
Okay, what did he find?
He looked at incarceration rates across Chicago neighborhoods. And the findings are, well, horrifying.
How bad?
A Black neighborhood, West Garfield Park, had an incarceration rate more than 40 times higher than the white neighborhood with the highest rate, Clearing.
40 times? It's hard to even process that number.
It's almost incomprehensible. It speaks volumes about concentrated disadvantage, policing, lack of opportunity, the whole destructive legacy.
And Sampson had a powerful way of describing this difference.
Yeah, he did. His conclusion is crucial. This is a staggering differential, a difference of kind, not degree.
A difference of kind, not degree. What does that mean, unpacked?
It means it's not just more or less of the same thing, like a bit less income or slightly more crime. It's that the fundamental nature of life, the daily reality, the opportunities, the safety, the prospects, it's all structurally different.
2 different worlds, basically.
Coexisting in the same city, but operating under completely different rules, shaped by these historical policies and their echoes.
And critically, this isn't just Chicago, is it?
No. The source is very clear. It's a similar story across the country. The specifics might change, but the pattern segregation, disparity, concentrated disadvantage stemming from redlining is national.
It's the blueprint for inequality in almost every American city. Maybe your city.
Which leads to some really eye-opening research by Professor Sharkey. His work tackles this idea about class and neighborhoods.
Okay.
And he found something pretty shocking. Black people with upper-middle-class incomes do not generally live in upper-middle-class neighborhoods.
Wait, say that again. Even if Black families achieve, like, high income?
They still, on average, don't live in the same kinds of well-resourced neighborhoods as white families with similar or even much lower incomes.
That blows my mind. It challenges that whole idea of just working your way up and out.
It really does. The source gives the specific data. Black families making $100,000 a year typically live in neighborhoods similar to those where white families making only $30,000 live.
100,000 versus 30,000. That's a massive difference in income.
Huge. But they're experiencing similar neighborhood conditions. School quality, safety, services, environmental factors.
So even substantial economic success doesn't buy you out of the legacy of this discrimination.
Not in the same way it does for white families. It shows how deep the structural barriers go. Wealth buys different things depending on your race, essentially. Different levels of community, different levels of opportunity.
And the implication of that finding is huge.
It's profound. Sharkey concludes, blacks and whites inhabit such different neighborhoods that it is not possible to compare the economic outcomes of black and white children.
You can't even compare them because the starting points, the environments, are so fundamentally different.
Exactly. If neighborhood matters that much for a kid's chances, schools, safety, health, everything, what does this persistent gap mean for generations of black children?
It's a massive structural barrier to mobility, built right into the map.
Built right into the map, even when individual families achieve economic success.
You know, the stats are powerful, but sometimes seeing it visually just clicks differently. And that's where projects like T-Races come in the testbed for the redlining archives of California's exclusionary spaces from UNC.
Yeah, those visualization projects are incredible. They make the history so immediate.
And what did T-Races do exactly?
Basically, they took those old physical redlining maps from the 30s and 40s.
The ones with the actual colored pencil line?
Yeah, those ones. And they digitized them and overlaid them onto modern Google Maps of cities today.
So you can see the old lines on today's streets.
Precisely. And what's just fascinating and kind of disturbing is how clearly those historical lines drawn decades ago, based on racist logic, still map onto present-day realities.
You mean like racial demographics today still follow those old red lines?
Often, yes. Or patterns of investment or property values or even things like environmental hazards. The divisions drawn then are often still visible now. It's a visual gut punch, really. Makes the invisible visible.
The author of the Atlantic piece, Alexis Madrigal, he had a personal experience with this in California, right? In the East Bay.
He did. He looked up his own neighborhood in Oakland.
And what did he find?
He found his place was right next to a block of red, in a yellow strip, and near a swath of blue.
So right on the edge of different zones.
Exactly. And he said it felt and still feels like an in-between zone, kind of caught between these historical classifications. I think a lot of people might recognize that feeling in their own areas.
Yeah, that sense of boundaries, even if you can't quite name why they're there.
Right. And then Madrigal makes this really striking observation about his area today.
What's that?
He says, go a few blocks west, downhill, and the neighborhoods are primarily black. Go a few blocks east, into the hills, and the neighborhoods are almost exclusively white.
Wow. So the lines drawn 80 years ago are still reflected in the racial makeup block by block today.
It's a vivid example. These policies, officially dead for decades, created patterns of segregation and economic difference that are still right there in your neighborhood today.
It's not just history, it's the present.
It's the architecture of the present built on that past, still shaping who lives where, what resources they have access to, what opportunities exist.
So let's try and wrap this up. This deep dive, it's really shown how government policy, specifically the FHA's redlining from, 34 to 68, wasn't just discriminatory. It was like the architect of so much of the inequality we see today.
A foundational architect. It systematically blocked black communities from homeownership, from investment, from building generational wealth. It literally drew the lines of disadvantage.
Lines that are still shaping everything. Property values, schools, health, safety, things we might not even consciously connect back to those old maps.
And the results, as the sources show, aren't just numbers on a page. There are profound differences in income, yes, but also those staggering incarceration rates, the overall quality of life, that difference of kind, not degree.
Yeah, that phrase really sticks.
And it persists even for black families who've achieved upper middle class incomes, which tells you how deep and structural this is. Economic success alone can't just erase it.
It's knowledge that really shifts how you see things, isn't it?
It should. Understanding this history, understanding how policy created these outcomes, is crucial for for understanding inequality today and for thinking about how we might actually address it. It forces us to look at the foundations.
So a final thought for you, the listener, as you go about your day, maybe, look around your own neighborhood a bit differently.
Yeah, notice the buildings, the businesses, the parks, the roads. Who lives where?
Right.
Where does investment seem to flow or not flow?
Do you see any lines, visible or invisible? Echoes of those old green, blue, yellow, red zones.
And think about it. If these policies from decades ago had such a powerful, lasting effect, what did that tell us about the power of policy today?
Right. How are decisions being made now that might be shaping opportunity and equity or inequity for the future?
It's a history that's still being written, in a way,
Yeah.
still shaping our present. And it really invites you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and see that invisible architecture all around you.